This is a Media Lab podcast. Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. Okay, well, things are cooling outside, but getting pretty hot and heavy if you're following any type of politics in the world. But we're not going to talk about that here today. Instead, we're going to talk about a woman who has spent her entire life putting on masks, only to try and strip it off inside of a song to try and uncover who she actually is. But who she actually is, she no longer knows. Or maybe that says more about me than I care to admit. We have a really good show today. We have a new guest. Celina Reynes is here to discuss the song Ah But Underneath, this unique song that was written just for the 1987 London version of Follies, but which has proved useful in the intervening years in case they have a Phyllis who can sing better than she can dance. I want to go to a couple of weeks ago, though, because that was when we were talking about Losing My Mind, which, I mean, I'm also doing that. But we were talking about different versions of that song, and I forgot to mention the fact that that song has been covered by so many people, and a few people reached out to me to be like, how did you not talk about the fact that Liza Minnelli did a disco version of this song? And to those people, I greatly apologize. Here is just a snippet of that.
The sun comes up, I think about you. The coffee cup, I think about you. I want you so, it's like I'm losing my mind.
You need to go and watch the music video for this. It is buck wild. And if I describe to you what is going on, you would not believe me. Please go and watch this music video so that I am not the only person who knows about it. So some of the people who told me about that song, of course, are my patrons, the people who help donate to this show to make it grow and be better than what it is. In particular, a huge shout out to the God That's Good tier, as I keep calling them the Holy Triumvirate currently over there, Jack, Todd, and Barry. But I guess it's time for Plodding Along. Plodding Along is the part of the show where I describe to you what is happening in the plot. Not much has changed since last week in that this song usually goes in the exact same spot that the story of Lucy and Jessie goes into. So depending on the actors that have been cast, some people will choose the story of Lucy and Jessie, and some people will choose to do this song, Ah But Underneath. But it's still a Phyllis song, and it's her still trying to come to terms with what's going on in her life. Okay, I'm going to go thank some sponsors, and then when I return, it'll be my conversation with Celina Reynes about Ah But Underneath. Putting It Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Putting It Together is brought to you by the inaugural YEG Podfest. That's YEG spelled Y-E-G. It's presented by the Edmonton Community Foundation in partnership with the Alberta Podcast Network and LitFest, Canada's non-fiction festival. It's running October 1st through 3rd, so very soon. The festival will be held entirely online this year, so anyone can experience it. Events will include masterclasses with experts, panel discussions, feature interviews, and more. This is a free event, and it would be great to see you come out for this. I am going to be there. I am helping do a masterclass on how to sell a podcast to your boss with Alberta Podcast Network's Karen Unland, as well as myself. So we'll be going through different tips and tricks if this is something that you think you want to bring into your business life, or a way to convince the people that are the deciders on making this something that you want to pursue. So come and hang out. Again, it's free, or you can stick around and see some of the other stuff that's going on, like the keynote address being done by Jed Abumrad of Radiolab and Dolly Parton's America, as well as a whole host of great people from the network. So again, all events are free to register. Donations are greatly appreciated though, and you can check the full lineup over at yegpodfest.ca. On this episode of Putting It Together, we'd like to tell you about what's new with our friends at Story Hive. Since 2013, Tell a Story Hive has funded productions and supported emerging filmmakers with mentorship and guidance from the National Screen Institute. The Story Hive program has brought hundreds of films to life from creators in Western Canada. Story Hive is committed to supporting underrepresented filmmakers and stories, which is why we want you to jump on this opportunity. Story Hive's documentary edition is back, and this one is all about local heroes. They're looking for documentary pitches from Alberta residents that highlight extraordinary citizens in your community, big or small. Successful pitches will receive $20,000 in customized mentorship to produce their project. Applications are open until October 7th at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. Check the eligibility requirements and apply now on storyhive.com.
Judge a book by its cover. The thing that counts is what's inside. Never judge a lady by her lover. It isn't a reliable guide. A lady made
Celina Reynes, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Because you are a new guest on to the podcast, I would love it if you would start with maybe just describing who you are and what it is that you do.
Well, I am a high school English teacher. I teach at the high school I went to, actually, so that's a fun experience.
Do you work with any teachers that you had as a student?
Yeah, my department head for a while was my AP English Lit teacher. It should be intimidating, but it actually wasn't. I loved it. And right now, my current principal is actually a Sondheim fanatic. So he will quote, he will quote like "Children Will Listen" or the opening of Sunday in the Park with George at our big school-wide meetings. It's like me and the other drama teachers are the ones really excited about that. It's great.
That's awesome. Do you do the same thing? Do you quote Sondheim in your class?
I do occasionally quote Sondheim to my class. Not as often as I'd like to.
Which English classes are you teaching?
I teach freshmen and sophomores, and they have their own challenges, but sophomore year is really fun because we get to do a lot of Shakespeare and we get to act things out in class and get to be very dramatic with everything.
That's what I was about to ask, because I'm in Canada, of course, and I know our education system is a little bit different. So what are you actually learning in English class?
You're right. Everyone's curriculum is different. For us, freshman year is all about showing different types of social pressure and also different types of discrimination, stories about oppression. And, you know, we do Of Mice and Men, and we do several short stories and Great Expectations. And we'll talk a lot about class and race. Sophomore year is all about the hero's journey. So what's really wonderful about sophomore year is we're discussing, you know, how the hero's journey plays into different stories. We're discussing myths from around the world. And we're really encouraging students to think analytically about that, but also write their own narratives.
Do you show examples of stuff that does not follow the hero's journey at all? Like, do you show like the counterexamples at all?
No.
Yeah.
I think if I showed the counterexamples or any counterexamples, I think my kid's head would just explode.
I know.
I think so much of learning, like in high school, is you want to see those patterns. You want to discover those patterns and get excited about, like, it's almost like solving a puzzle. You want to get excited about seeing those patterns everywhere. But that's an interesting suggestion. I would love to take a closer look at that.
This is something that I find gets shared on Reddit like every 6 to 7 months. But it's the Kurt Vonnegut. He drew like the 10 different storylines that you'll basically be involved from. He did it as a special project, and I think hilariously got like a D or something like that in the class he was in. But now people use it as a demonstration. Like, there's the classic hero's journey, but there's also these other like forms that you'll see a lot in literature as well. But that can sometimes confuse the point probably of what you're trying to communicate. I think Follies would confuse them too, because it really has no plot whatsoever.
I was just about to say that. Although you could see kind of Sally's appearance at the theater as like a dissension into the special world. You could if you really forced it.
So I would love to know then, when was your first introduction to Sondheim?
It was at the high school that I teach at, actually. I was a student, and the Tim Burton movie had just come out. And so our school is a Catholic school, but for some reason we decided to do Sweeney Todd as the spring musical.
Whoa, okay, interesting.
Yeah, it was very avant-garde for the time. And I wasn't involved in that musical, but we took a very condensed version of it to a drama competition. And I played Joanna. I didn't really have I didn't really have the charisma to carry off a Mrs. Lovett, but I say I'd do a good Celina.
Yeah, you did your green finish in Linnet Bird.
Yeah.
It's great. So was it from there then, like, how did you start to grow into Sondheim? What was the next show right after that?
I think I answered this question wrong. I suppose that wasn't my first experience, although that was my first significant experience. I watched Into the Woods as a kid, and that really had touched me. I had like the DVD with Bernadette Peters. And then after that, I started getting into writing for musical theater because I had always written like folk songs and pop songs, and I wanted to write for the theater. And I decided I would binge all of Sondheim's work. And I got caught up on different musicals really caught my attention at different points in my life. I mean, Company was like the musical of like my early 20s. And then I got really excited about A Little Night Music, even though I think that's a musical that focuses more on like mature relationships. You know, I've had like my flirtations with other work of his. And yeah, it's just been a progression from there.
When did you encounter Follies?
I don't think I encountered Follies purposefully. I sort of just like...
Follies encountered me.
Yes. It was part of like, oh, I have to listen to every Sondheim musical as part of my education, and Follies kind of jumped at me. And at first I really didn't like it, but then I ended up growing to really appreciate it. Like, I think it's one of his most psychological musicals, emotional musicals. I think there's like something very like beautiful and ambitious about it.
Was that just from... this is me totally leading the witness. I apologize. But is that because of just repeated listenings, or was it finally when you actually saw some of the productions, or have you seen a production, I guess is the next question. But was it when you started to see how the musical was staged that you started to get an appreciation for it?
I don't think so. I have never had the pleasure of seeing it live. I have watched kind of this, what appears to be a bootlegged version with Bernadette Peters on YouTube. And I thought that the staging of that was really interesting. What really got me to love it was I had actually done Losing My Mind as an audition piece. So when I was trying to do local theater and getting kind of excited about wetting my feet again in the theater scene in the Bay Area, I chose Losing My Mind to audition with. And I really digged into the lyrics and the emotions of that piece and the characters, and I found myself loving it like more and more.
I don't want to just jump into the lyrics quite yet without really delving into something that you just mentioned about how you yourself are involved in the musical theater and writing, composing. I never want to come out, even though I have a deep love for Stephen Sondheim. I mean, I make a podcast about him, so I guess that's obvious. But I don't want to be like, he's the only one who does things right. However, I am so curious when like composers come onto this show. I want to know how you write music and lyrics. And I'm not meaning like what comes first. I'm more like he very much is in tune with the character singing. So you try and get into the heads of them. Like how does the process work for you?
Well, I've been writing lyrics and music together for a really long time. So in some ways it comes naturally at this point. But not to interrupt, sorry, but were you ever inspired by like YouTube or anything like that as well? When I was little, I had dreams of becoming like YouTube famous, you know. It never happened.
I only say that because I find that there is this whole generation, a lot of friends of mine even, because YouTube was such a big thing, you know, in 2005 and onwards, there's so many people who started like writing their own music, a lot of it on ukulele, but there was I think this huge change in like young people expressing themselves. But
no, I had written my own songs long before like people started getting YouTube famous, because there was an early period of YouTube where like that was like the big thing, like you would put your voice out there and you want people to hear you. But I don't know what made me start. My mom was a church musician, so I was around music a lot. I had taken piano lessons for a really long time, and I just always loved like telling stories in that way. I guess I must have also been inspired by like, I'm trying to think back to elementary school years. Like I was obsessed with Avril Lavigne, right? Like her storytelling. So There was probably a combination of factors.
What were your first few songs about?
Oh, I remember them distinctly. I had one little number in like first grade that was like, when I jump, I fly. You know, it was very like dramatic, you know. And I had written another song when I was very young, like maybe 7 or 8, comparing love to like harmonies and music. It was all very cheesy and cliche, you know, because you're a kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you know? You're a stupid kid at that time. Well, that brings us, I guess, to our song that we're going to be talking about here today. This is an interesting one. We're going to be talking about Ah, But Underneath, a Phyllis number that will occasionally replace the story of Lucy and Jessie in a Follies production. This is really from the fabled 1987 production of Follies, which is a unique beast, and maybe even not so like subtextually. I don't know if Sondheim is like a huge fan of that 1987 version, where he basically says was forced to write 4 new songs, none of which that he really loves. But as he does point out, this is a great substitute for a Phyllis that can actually sing more than she can dance. And if she can dance better than she can sing, then they just keep the story of Lucy and Jessie. Was this your first introduction to this song at all, was for this show, or were you familiar with the 87 production?
No, I encountered this song specifically for your show. I actually, when you suggested it, I had a hard time finding it, but it didn't even pop up immediately. I was like, where is this? Where is this song in terms of plot placement? Like, where is it?
Let me answer that for the people at home who maybe have not really sat down with this 1987 version.
Yeah.
I'm actually going to bring up my phone here. Yeah, this is how it kind of gets broken up. It's really weird because you normally have the 2 songs that are sung by the couples, like You're Gonna Love Tomorrow and Love Will See Us Through. So you have like the younger version of Buddy and Sally and the younger version of Ben and Phyllis. So in the London version, they do You're Gonna Love Tomorrow as its own like unique piece. Then they go into Buddy's Blues, Losing My Mind, and then they come back to You're Gonna Love Tomorrow. Like they really split that song completely out, and then they put Ah But Underneath right after that. So it really, I feel, messes with the organization at the end. It makes it a little bit weirder. And I'm not 100% sure why they decided to break it out exactly like that. I don't know if you have any insight or thoughts about why they decide to really mess around with the order of the songs in this version.
Are you saying they put You're Gonna Love Tomorrow, Love Will See Us Through between Losing My Mind and the story of Lucy?
They don't even do the story of Lucy and Jessie in the 1987 version. That's completely taken out. And so they do Love Will See Us Through as its own unique song. Then they go straight into Buddy's Blues, Losing My Mind.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And then they come back to You're Gonna Love Tomorrow and go into Ah But Underneath right after that. Oh, I
absolutely agree. I mean, that changes a lot of things for the ending. I mean, I think one of the best parts about the ending is you are seeing each character kind of confess their own inner fears and inner desires. And it's nice to have them. I mean, it makes sense to have them do it one after another. If you just slip a song with the couples singing together, like in the middle of their individual confessions, I totally see what you mean.
Yeah, I find it messes it for the wrong reasons. But again, nothing to say about this song in particular. It's just weird how they mess around with the song structure, because I don't think it works as nicely. Anyways, that is kind of like a minor criticism I'm going to level at it.
Do you think it has to do with the pacing differences between the story of Lucy and Jessie and Ah But Underneath?
I think it must be probably more to do with that, because this one is definitely much more of a showier piece. Like this is very much a well, I shouldn't say that 100%. I've only seen the story of Lucy and Jessie staged once, and it's not like a huge production number. There's like other like background vocalists and stuff, but this one is very involved. So I don't know if they were trying to go from like least to most involved. Like I just don't know.
The only reason I can think of is that maybe the story of Lucy and Jessie involves like dancing, and it's a lot faster, you know, and maybe they wanted to ease them, change up the momentum because the other song was slower? I have no idea.
Well, luckily I have Cameron McIntosh on the phone, and he's going to explain everything here for us. Let's do this. Let's jump into the lyrics here then. I've broken this up into, I think, 5 different sections. Before we do that, the biggest thing that I want to give credit is the portrayals of Phyllis, even though really we're only going to be hearing one performance during this episode. But the people who have portrayed Phyllis, the original Broadway cast featured Alexis Smith. In the 1987 version, it was Diana Rigg, and the person we're going to be primarily listening to here today. And in the 2017 National Theatre version, it's Janie D who portrays Phyllis. And so we start off with Phyllis saying, "Never judge a book by its cover. The thing that counts is what's inside. Never judge a lady by her lover. It isn't a reliable guide. The lady may decide her obligations are merely to reflect his expectations. If his idea of ecstasy is to see what he expects to see, well, ignorance is bliss, but think of what he'll miss."
Never judge a book by its cover. The thing that counts is what's inside. Never judge a lady by her lover. It isn't a reliable guide. A lady may decide her obligations are merely to reflect his expectations. If his idea of ecstasy is to see what he expects to see, well, ignorance is bliss, but think of what he'll miss.
All right, anything that you want to, I don't know, pick apart in this opening couple of stanzas?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I love a good intro to a song.
Right.
Just builds up suspense. I noticed a lot of cliches, book by its cover, the ignorance is bliss. And I know that Sondheim hates cliches. Like, he hates incorporating them into his writing. And that's probably like the one of the main things he tells other people not to do. But I think it kind of works for this song just because, Phyllis is trying to be agreeable with everyone and cliches are meant to apply to everyone. Right. So
yeah.
I don't hate it.
Well, I think there's something to be said about that because the Phyllis character is, I find, kind of fascinating. I kind of want an entire show with just Phyllis at the center of it.
I know, right?
I've mentioned this with other guests. I kind of wish he got more to do in the first half of the show, which is unfortunate. I know this is kind of like Sally's show is kind of what it's usually pitched as, but I think Phyllis is somewhat of the more interesting character. Be that as it may, there is this idea of like, she starts off as like young Phyllis and be like, I will become what you want me to become. And then gets completely disgusted with herself in her later years, right? And so this one is like, I appear to be this one thing, but don't expect you know everything about me because I have seen some stuff.
Yeah, it's like this classic Sondheim character, this older woman who is like cynical, like on the surface, but actually like quite vulnerable.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I was going to say attracted to, but that makes me like this character a lot. I find her very much like the Joanne character from Company, right?
That's what I was thinking.
A bit acerbic, but like get a few drinks in her and she kind of like brings her defenses down a little bit. So that would be that's my two-hander I want to do, Joanne and Phyllis in one show.
Oh my gosh,
Someone write that
would
show.
be a dream, yeah.
The one thing I do need to say, you have to grab a copy of Finishing the Hat that Sondheim wrote because this is going to be almost impossible to describe what I'm talking about. But he does this really fascinating thing where the S actually comes at the beginning of a phrase, but it's actually ending a word. It's supposed to mimic that because it says ecstasy is like, and it's apostrophe S is what it starts off the next line as. So I've always looked at that as ecstasies, like he's almost pluralizing what's coming before it. You could also say it's supposed to be like is, it's just like an abbreviated for is. But the way you're supposed to basically sing that like really fast together.
Well,
so I think it's intentionally difficult to like understand what she's saying.
I know exactly why he did that though. There's this school of writing lyrics, this idea of when you write lyrics, you need perfect rhymes. Because if you don't have perfect rhymes, the audience is going to, subconsciously think you're lazy.
Right.
So,
right.
He's doing that so ecstasy rhymes with expectancy. It's not C's, so he has to move the apostrophe S over. But that's a weird quirk of seeing lyrics on a page.
Yeah, when you read it, you'll actually understand what I'm saying, but it's just kind of weird to like go through that. When she sings it, you don't really pick up on that, I don't think, but phrased like that is how it's supposed to be. So she continues on saying, she was smart, tart, dry as a martini, but underneath. And if you don't know about this song, she's actually doing a bit of a striptease. So in the notes, it says she takes something else, or she takes something off. She was all heart, something by Puccini, but underneath. She takes something else off at this point. In the depths of her interior were fears she was inferior and something even eerier, but no one dared to query her. Superior exterior.
She was smart, tart, dry as a martini, but underneath she was all heart, something by Puccini, but underneath, in the depths of her interior were fears she was inferior and something even eerier, but no one dared to query her superior exterior.
So we have just a ton of eternal rhymes going on in this lyric, right? Does this work for you at all?
Yes. I'm going to go out there and say yes. I especially love when he makes a rhyme by using a pronoun. So like Sweeney planned, he planned, right? Those rhymes are in like the opening of Sweeney Todd. I love, eerier and query her. Like, I just think it's wonderful. I think he talks a lot in interviews. He said some advice that you don't want to write yourself into a corner. And so I think, as we go on, we'll see all these internal rhymes are kind of dropped in subsequent verses. So I think it's amazing. It's like, I think the internal rhymes here are fabulous, and it's exactly what I would expect from him, but he has trouble maintaining it throughout the song.
I'm right there with you. I love it when he goes on runs like this because it's a little bit showing off, like, I'm not going to lie, but he does it so well that I don't really mind all that much. And at a certain point, I'm like, how long is he going to go with this? Can he go even further? But like, Courier is a pretty great one. I mean, the fact that he rhymes that like right before that with eerier, and it all sounds like natural to the ear is great. I want to delve in a little deeper into this section. The but underneath, right, is basically a reference to there's the face that she puts on, but there's actually more to her inside. Yeah. What do you think she means by this? Meaning, like, what is her underneath?
Well, I definitely agree with you. It has something to do with, who she really is, that vulnerability we were talking about. But it's also a double entendre. I mean, I'm glad that you mentioned that this is taking place within a striptease, because I think there's so many, like, subtle hints to the striptease that we would kind of miss if we didn't know the blocking.
Right, yeah. Like, and to be honest, because I have never seen this song performed, I'm glad that he is including the little stage directions here, because I was like, I wouldn't know if I picked this up just by listening to it, that's what she's doing in this. The striptease, I think, is often thought like I'm being vulnerable and revealing myself, but it's really not revealing anything. It's still just showing the exterior of the person.
Yes, exactly. And I kept, when I was seeing stage versions of this song, I'm just on YouTube, I kept thinking of Dita Von Teese, who I'm absolutely obsessed with, but she has so many routines that are built around showcasing her beauty, but it's not, there's never like a vulnerability to it. She's always in control, right? And I think that speaks to what's happening with Phyllis here. She is absolutely in control of what she is revealing to the audience and what she's, keeping to herself.
Mm-hmm. How much do you know about Puccini?
I know a bit. I studied opera in college, and I did a few arias during my lessons. So I don't know a lot about the history of him as a composer.
Well, I had to look it up a little bit because I kind of know Puccini's biggest hits, and that's about as far as my knowledge goes. But I don't really know how he fits into like the history of opera or anything like that. So this is basically what I gleaned. So, of course, an Italian opera composer. This is a slight dig I found on his Wikipedia page, to be honest. He is often termed the greatest composer of Italian opera after Verdi. so like a little dig, I think, there. But anyways, that's where he fits into the pantheon. But he was also...
But he's so different than Verdi.
Yeah, like super different. He came like right after, I think, as Verdi was like coming to the end of his career. Puccini and like his contemporaries were kind of coming out. They were these proponents of what they call verismo style, which is described as not focused on like gods, mythological figures, or kings and queens, but on the average contemporary man and woman and their problems, generally of a sexual, romantic, or violent nature. So they're bringing more like realism into opera, is basically what Puccini was doing.
Yeah, veritas or truth. Verismo, you said?
Yeah, I'm probably saying that wrong, but yeah, verismo is what it is.
And I don't want to speak as if I know a bunch about this, because the truth is I don't. But my understanding
you are the Puccini expert. So.
No, but from singing a few Puccini arias, I got the impression that his musical style is also a lot more naturalistic than what was coming before him. Like, the phrasing is a lot more melodic, but it's also a lot more natural, I guess. I don't know how to describe that. Yeah. Maybe it's in the length of the notes, or, you know, the length of the notes, you know? So.
Yeah. Well, I think that this, like, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I mean, I think why it's important to be talking about Puccini in the first place is in the lyric, right? It's like, she was all heart, something by Puccini, right? So she's not trying to portray herself as like a god, a mythological figure, or anything like that. I am one of these people of their time. I'm a real person, and there is heart to me. That is hopefully what people understand the underneath to be. So I think that there's a very specific reason why he is evoking this composer specifically.
And it's also so strange, because I agree with you, but I see so many in the performances I've seen on YouTube, they almost say it with this sarcastic flair, like she was all heart, you know?
Right.
Like she's not truly willing to admit that yet.
Well, I guess, that's probably part of the character too, right?
Yeah.
Where, I think it is hard for her. Well, I think it's hard for her to admit to herself who she truly is. I think she almost gets there with "Could I Leave You?" So like earlier in "Could I Leave You?", right? She gets almost to that point, like, "Oh, could I leave you? I can, but I'm not going to, because of all these other reasons that are in my life."
Yeah, and even with that song, she's deflecting so much of her emotion, like with humor, with jokes, right? You know.
Yeah, no, that's true. See, so she's like just like Joanne.
I know.
She continues on here by saying, "She was chic, sleek, anything in fashion. That was just a shell. Take a close peek. You could see the passion. That was one as well. To conclude, you'd soon discover the secret of her appeal was the wonder which lay underneath, which she wasn't about to reveal."
She was chic, sleek, anything in fashion. That was just a shell. Take a close peek, you could see the passion. That was one as well. To conclude, you soon discover the secret of her appeal was the wonder which lay underneath, which she wasn't about to reveal.
So what about this section?
Well, the double entendres are intensifying for sure. You know, I don't know if this is what's happening with the Hatbox series, but is appeal also hyphenated in the middle for you?
It is, but I don't know why, to be perfectly honest, because I think she's supposed to peel something off between app and then peel at the. I think
that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
I think possibly in staging this, they might have the option of doing that, where she says app, peel something off, and then continues the song peel, right? To have that double thing of peel being like ending the word, but also peeling something off at the same time.
I definitely think that is what's going on. And again, it's so interesting how the punctuation is telling us that. I mean, the idea of revealing, or you've got a shell, you're taking a close peek. So she means like peek into my soul, but also peek at my body as I give you the striptease. So yeah, so much here. And then of course I love the rhyming of discover and of her. You know, it's another one of those pronoun rhymes. It's like, mwah, chef's kiss.
Well, I mean, there's some really cool ones here, right? Because he rhymes conclude with "you'd" as well. So like, there's all these interesting like little internal rhymes, end rhymes, beginning rhymes that are kind of going on in here. But yeah, I think this is kind of just essentially a recapitulation of what has come before this. Of like, hey, I have this exterior self that I am promoting to everyone around me, but there's all this other stuff that is actually that I'm kind of bottling up inside for myself. And if only you saw what was actually the true me, right?
You know what? The line, take a close peek, you could see the passion. Comparing that to the Puccini line, it's like, you know, it just kind of shows she's not really showing her heart. She's not really all heart. She's not really being vulnerable. You know, that's a shell.
Right.
So I think she's really not ceding any ground, you know, with the audience.
I think the next small section here is actually pretty eye-opening, because this is where what Sondheim is termed the servants kind of come in here. I'm guessing the servants of like the party that they're at the Wiseman Theater here in this case.
Well, they're dancers. Yeah, it's kind of the classic. I'm going to mention her again. Dita Von Teese does this in her routines a lot. It's the classic, you have to have men in the wings, you know, to hold your earrings and your gloves and your boas as you take them off, you know.
So the servants come in and say she was sly, wry, cool or coy or candid. And then Phyllis says that was her liability, the curse of versatility. And then the servants say smart, shy, whatever was demanded. And Phyllis says she'd only allow a man to see enough to fan his fantasy. And then the boys say she made compliance into a science, one of the giants. And then Phyllis ends, loud or lewd or la-di-da-di, everything to everybody.
She was sly, wry, cool or coy or candid.
That was her liability, the curse of versatility.
Smart, shy, whatever was demanded.
She'd only allow a man to see enough to fan his fantasy.
She made compliance into a science, one of the giants.
Loud or lewd or la-di-da-di, everything to everybody.
What's a la-di-da-di, Kyle?
Well, you've hit upon one of my bit of a pet peeve, which I think I might have even said on this podcast before. As far as I understand, it's just a nonsense syllable she's singing here to make the rhyme with everybody work. And I've never been a huge fan of that. I don't care who the composer is, but I don't know. I don't know if you have any special insight into that at all.
I don't know. I'm wondering if it's, you know, one of the colloquialisms of the time. You know,
possibly.
It sounds like something my mother would say, like la-di-da, you know?
Well, I guess that would be more so like, because I was born in 1945, apparently, I will sometimes say la-di-da, like to like just like hand wave something away. But then adding the D at the end, maybe that's some sort of like, I don't know, regional thing that happened in New York City at the time. I have no idea.
Or it's just for the rhyme, you know?
Or it's just for the rhyme. That's probably more to the point. It's in this section, though, that I really want to lean in to word choice, because this is a recurring thing that happens on this show and becomes super important when Into the Woods finally comes around. But the importance of using or instead of and in these lyrics, and why it's important that he didn't use that word, because it very drastically changes, I think, the meaning of this song.
Mm-hmm.
Because we start off by saying she was sly, wry, cool or coy or candid, which are three vastly different things. They are not similes with one another. So in that case, because it's or, it's like I can be multi-faced here. I can be whatever you need me to be, right? Yeah. And this is why, and Sondheim would be the first to say absolutely not. So I'm going to save myself the letters, but this is why I think that somewhat of this song could be read as like Sondheim knowing exactly what this character is like, because he is often like described as this chameleon composer. He can kind of fit with whatever the subject matter is,
and with all that entails.
Yeah, but sometimes hard to like grasp like what is your musical style? I guess you're known for pastiche, but like what is it that you are? And it's like, well, it's basically whatever the show demands of him is what he is. And I think that Phyllis is very similar to it. Like, do I need to be like this upstanding, like wife to Ben, or do I need to be like the great person who's putting on parties, or like what role do you need me to portray? And I can do that.
Okay, I'm worried I'm going to butcher this, but it's kind
Sure.
of like John Keats's idea of negative capability, like the idea that an artist needs to be able to put themselves in the position of all their characters. Like that's something Shakespeare did. So I think in some ways you could be right about that. You know, I think we have to project ourselves onto all these different types of people in order to tell a story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You did mention how you feel like this song maybe deepens the message from like the original Broadway cast, for instance. I don't know if you wanted to expand on that point or not.
Well, sure. Yeah, I think it has to do also with your comment about word choice, about choosing the word or. But, you know, this is replacing the song, The Story of Lucy and Jessie. And I feel like in that song, Phyllis is saying, here are my two options. You could be this or that, and putting them together is the whole trick.
Yeah.
And for this song, it's a little bit more complicated because she's showing all the different facets of her personality, but the whole point of it is that there's nothing underneath. I mean, I'm kind of spoiler alert, but at the end of the song, there's nothing there at all. So I think in some ways it's deepening her character a little bit more than the original, just because it's arriving at that final, you know, devastating conclusion. And it's doing that with such humor, you know?
I wonder, I mean, not that we get a whole lot of like backstory or anything like that. Additional information, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Do you agree with her conclusion with that then? Do you think there isn't anything underneath her, or is she protesting too much? Like, is there actually stuff there that she's just not seeing?
Everyone has stuff underneath. Everyone has stuff underneath. I think, though, it's hard to realize that you have something underneath it all if you are used to playing all these different roles. And I think it's more capturing that idea that if you're going to be everything to everybody, you know, you're going to lose sight of what exactly you have that's yours.
Yeah, I think possibly the biggest thing that is a tell here in this section is that she has spent so much time like perfecting these different, I guess, outside faces. Yeah, she's kind of losing herself into it. I'm going to make this really wild analogy, so I'm going to apologize if no one understands what I'm talking about. But as a somewhat closet wrestling fan, I actually know I totally 100% am.
Oh my gosh, my partner's a wrestling fan. It's so weird. It
is, yes. I mean, this is possibly why I also like theater so much, because that's all wrestling is.
He compares it to theater all the time. Yeah.
It 100% is. And there's something that happens, not to every single wrestler, but definitely for, I think, the top tier people in that field. I'm not going to make this devolve into a wrestling podcast, but what happens is, like, with their characters that they have, right? They're performing a character, which a lot of times is like their personality dialed up to 11, is usually what the most successful people are. But what is wild to see in wrestling, and older wrestlers in particular, is that they kind of forget that outside of wrestling, people don't act like wrestlers, and they fall into that character they've been playing for so long that they lose themselves in it. And if anyone knows who Ric Flair is, he's like the 100% the best example of this, where he has lived that gimmick for so long that he doesn't know when to turn it off.
Yeah, it's like, I think the term they use for what's real, or maybe it's the reverse, is shoot. It's like, what's shoot? Yes.
Yeah, shooting is when you like bring reality into the wrestling world. And kayfabe is the special word they use to like the make-believe stuff that they use in wrestling. But like you see that like Hulk Hogan is the same way, and like etc. You can go on and down the line of the old wrestlers from the 80s and 90s especially, where it's like you were talking like outside of a wrestling context, and you're doing a promo. You're like, you think you're sitting in front of like an arena full of people, like yelling at your opponent, you're gonna defeat him at WrestleMania. I'm like, this is so weird to watch. Anyways, I feel like this is kind of like Phyllis in the way that she has been portraying these roles for so long that she's kind of forgotten who she really is.
Yeah, there's like the kayfabe Phyllis, and then there's like what's real.
That's right. So this Sunday, she is going to bring the thunder, 24-inch pythons, all that kind of stuff. I really do want to mention, though, the rhyming couplet, or I guess the rhyming scheme that goes on in this section outside of that la-di-da-di, because I think there's some great stuff in here. Specifically, Man to see rhyming with fantasy, which I think that's great. I feel like I would love to have seen the moment where Sondheim came up with that and be like, yes, you did good, Steve.
He's admitted, he encourages people to use a rhyming dictionary, but there's some things it's like rhyming dictionaries don't come up with it. You split the word into like syllable chunks and really thought about it,
Exactly.
I feel like he's someone who would like puzzles.
Oh, well, he is a person who likes puzzles. He makes his own crossword puzzles, or he
You're
did for years.
Me.
No, read up on it. He did this thing for what was it? Maybe in the New York Times. I could be making that up, but for like a few years, he made cryptid crosswords. Those really hard ones where it's not just even a regular crossword. You had to do all these wild things. And also, if you're into theater history, do you know about the play Sleuth? It was actually made into a movie as well. One of the characters is supposed to be modeled after Sondheim, and that character loves making puzzles for other people. Yeah.
That sounds fabulous. I'm going to have to look it up after we get off.
Watch the original from the 70s. Don't watch the remake they made in the 90s or the early 2000s.
Will do.
So here's how the song ends. She goes on, Phyllis says, I should actually, let me read the stage direction first. So we've gotten up to this point, and it says, she steps behind a towel, gets into the tub, she bathes a moment, her body masked by soap bubble girls. So I'm guessing that people are like holding up little bubbles. She was grand, bland, brave or brisk or brittle, anything required, both concerned and strictly non-committal, and a little tired. She was definitely deferential, or so they wrote on her wreath. No one ever glimpsed her. And then she does a little bump, it says, and the bubbles kind of start to fall off of her. Potential, but when stripped, bump, down to the essential, mind you, this is bump, bump, confidential, way down underneath, and now she's completely covered just by your towel. She was, and then they whip the towel away, revealing empty space and a spotlight. So, like, the spotlight isn't on her, it's like a few steps away from her, so it's like this empty spotlight. And then she was, and she takes a few steps towards the spotlight. She was, and then she just appears at the edge of the proscenium. Sometimes when the wrappings fall, there's nothing underneath at all.
She was grand, bland, brave or brisk or brittle, anything required, both concerned and strictly non-committal, and a little tired. She was deftly deferential, or so they wrote on her wreath. No one ever glimpsed her potential, but when stripped down to the essential, mind you, this is confidential, way down underneath.
She was. She was. She was.
Sometimes when the wrappings fall, there's nothing underneath at all.
Sorry, I should say, after that line, she actually does, she blows, and then the spotlight goes out. So you never actually see anything, of course. So this whole number is like completely theatrical and like very involved and stuff like that. But let's focus on the lyrics first. Anything that you want to pull out from this very end section?
Oh my gosh. Well, one line, changeable as a chameleon with all that entails, has been like a huge mystery for me. I've looked at these lyrics, I don't know how many times, because I was so excited to come on the show. And I just can't figure it out. I don't think he intended entails to be a pun on a chameleon tail. Maybe it's like the cold-bloodedness. I have no idea. I don't think I've cracked the code yet.
You know what I just noticed? I don't think I read that section. So let me just do that so I can put it in the right spot. As changeable as a chameleon with all that entails, but nobody saw what was really underneath all the veils.
Changeable as a chameleon with all that entails, but nobody saw what was really underneath all those veils.
Now let me respond to what you just said there. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's a tough section because, I mean, with all that entails is referencing to like the first line there. It's changeable as a chameleon. But what does all that entail? I guess this is probably like devil in the details thing of what Sondheim says. I feel that feels to me like just a line that he needs to put in there to get into the next rhyme that he's trying to do, because it's changeable as a chameleon with all that entails. I don't know what that actually means.
I don't know either. I'm trying to, I think, maybe it's up to the singer or the actress to figure it out so that they can perform it. But
I guess one way you could look at this too is that he's actually not talking about the animal, a chameleon, where he's talking about like the concept of a chameleon, because otherwise the next couplet actually doesn't make any sense either. But nobody saw what was really underneath all the veils, because chameleons don't have veils either. Like he's mixing metaphors too much. If that is supposed to be the animal, a chameleon.
But I think if you don't understand the words, you at least understand like the emotion behind it. Like I feel, Phyllis is saying, and Sondheim saying through Phyllis, the idea of when you are changeable, you become invisible and nobody ever sees you.
Yeah. You risk blending into the background and not ever standing out for anything, I suppose. Right. I know we talked a little bit about like how she wraps this up, but how do you like these stage directions here? Like, as a theater fan, I feel like I would love to see this, like exactly the way to describe it here.
I love it. Am I going to get in trouble if I mention Dita Von Teese one more time?
You have reached your quota, actually.
Oh,
yes.
Crap.
No. Did she do like this very summer thing, I'm going to guess? Like,
she
with, like,
does a martini glass routine. She hops into a martini glass and does this whole spinning routine in there. I was kind of picturing that with the bathtub. I have never seen, in all my YouTubing of this song, trying to find a staged version, I have yet to see a version that stages it like what's written in the lyric book. Which is kind of sad. I want to see it.
Yeah, which is a hard thing. Like, I mean, Sondheim says in, I think, his foreword to the book, like, as far as he's concerned, these are like the authoritative like versions. But he's like, but I could be proven wrong or something like that. He gives himself a little bit of an out in the forward part. So these could be like old, like before this actually got staged for the first time. And this is as true as he thought it was at the time. But who knows?
Yeah, I always think about that kind of story from his life with, Jerry Robbins, and the idea that, if you don't have staging in mind, someone's going to get super mad at you.
Right. So it's nice. Like, this is what I'm thinking of, at least. But whatever, you're the director. You can take it. You can take it from here. Sort of reading between the lines, and also how he has been very vocal on this topic. I don't think he's really that enthusiastic about any of these 4 new songs that he wrote for Follies in London in 1987, partly because he felt like he was forced to. This song, he says, of course, like, this is great to substitute for the story of Lucy and Jessie if the Phyllis in that show is a better singer than she is a dancer. So there's a use for this, but that's about it. Otherwise, just keep it the way that I wrote it originally, sort of thing.
And you know what? I find that so strange, because he's also been very vocal about how, when he's writing for specific actors, really good music comes of it, because the person's voice, and like their character. And were all these 4 new songs, you probably know more about this than I do, were all 4 of these new songs written for specific actors in mind, or were they were just demanded?
That's actually a good question. I guess I don't know how involved he would have been with like the actors in this one. I would assume so, but that's honestly just an assumption. And maybe that's partly why he doesn't feel as close of an affinity to these, where maybe he wasn't as involved. It was just like a contract. The one positive thing I will say, honestly, about this song, because I actually kind of like the song, to be honest. I think of the 4 new ones, this is probably my favorite. Although Country House, I have a little bit of a love for it too. Just, I don't think it belongs in this show. But as a piece, it's great. It just doesn't belong in Follies. But what I was going to say too is that this is the only song I feel that sounds like it actually belongs in the show. Like, you can't substitute this out, because all the other ones, I'll be perfectly honest, sound like they belong in either Into the Woods or in A Sunday in the Park with George, which is about the time that he was writing both of those shows, was in 1987. So it feels like so, oh my gosh, I can't say that word. Anachronistic. It sounds so anachronistic. And in a way, it was like, this doesn't sound like it's of the same piece, and because it wasn't. It just wasn't.
Yeah, I do feel like this one just fits right in.
I guess, now that we've reached the end, like, overall thoughts on But Underneath.
Oh my gosh, overall thoughts. I think it's impossible for Sondheim to not be clever. I think, there's some really clever moments here. Love the striptease. I mean, you mentioned before this conversation how this is like one of he's written a handful of stripteases.
Yeah, let's end with that conversation, because I think that there is, and again, I might be looking at this in too much of a meta-narrative sort of way, but I think that it's interesting that he was such a big force inside of Gypsy, which also features stripteases, and this is another striptease that he's writing. But I don't know if you have anything to say about that specifically.
I don't know. I think we're always fascinated to some degree with like the art of the striptease. I think a striptease is also like, you know, it has a lot of potential as a metaphor, right? So maybe that's the fascination, or maybe it's just super fun to watch on stage. Who knows?
I mean, I think there's that theatricality to it. I mean, this is me. Not that I think he was like, from what I understand, he was never like mad or upset with writing with like, oh my God, Julie Stein. As like they had a great working relationship. Of course, Sondheim wanted to be the person writing both the lyrics and the music to that show. So it almost feels like this was his chance to be like, this is what my Gypsy would have been like. That's kind of how I read this a little bit. It's like I could have been more clever, and that like these are the musicality that you would have. To me, this is like a little bit of a window to like, what would Gypsy have been like if Sondheim had written both the lyrics and music? It's this song. This is basically what you've heard.
I wonder a little bit like whether or not the striptease number is happening because of, you know, where they are in the show. They're in a theater they were all former showgirls, you know, if it has something to do with that.
I think so too. And I think there is, I guess I shouldn't speak out of school here too much, because I'm not a Follies like super knowledgeable about like the actual Follies, not the show Follies, but like the actual like Ziegfeld Follies.
Right.
But from what I understand, there was nudity to a certain extent inside the Follies. Like there was actually strip teases that happened and stuff like that.
I feel like it was probably really risque for the time, you know?
Oh yeah, for sure. And then there was like vaudeville and all this other stuff that was happening. Not that those are interchangeable terms or anything like that too. But anyways, I think that maybe is a callback. Well, Celina, thank you so much for joining me here today. This has been so much fun. This is how I end all the episodes. But is there, if people wanted to see what you're up to, is there an easy way for them to do so online?
Oh my gosh. Well, my Instagram page has everything on it. It has like my website link and stuff. So if you want to say hi and geek out about Sondheim with me, I'm at Celina Reynes. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you. I had so much fun. Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network, to Yeg Podfest, and to Tell a Story Hive this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we're going to be talking about make the most of your music. Is this needed? As always, a big thanks to the great Chris Taniguchi who designed the podcast artwork, and to Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.
Three of the luckiest guys I know. Don't get better than your job. Can I see you? Oh, you were great. Oh, boy. Well, this special performance is for Sondheim's 80th birthday, and what a birthday you're having.
Hello! Vanessa, while you were taking it off, Regis was taking it off, too.